Hi, Erin.
See. Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't have the participant list open, so I couldn't see everybody, but now I see everybody coming in, so I apologize. I was looking at the chat only, and I was like, wow, there's only 2 people, but now I'm excited to see that there's more people here with us today. Okay, so we're recording, and I guess I just wanted to kick off this session by asking anybody or everybody really is how you are thinking about generative AI tools like ChatGPT, or if at all in teaching and learning. Uh, Take a minute to think about it for and just chat some ideas. Have you been doing things currently? Are you curious about different ways to use it in your own courses and discipline? So go ahead and take a minute to chat in some ideas if you'd like. And hoping to circle back to these in a little bit. Great. That's great. And then, I'm kind of right there with you in terms of some of the ideas that you're talking about. I think even personally, as a professional and a student, I've really taken to tools like ChatGPT because it's helped me in the process of brainstorming and generating ideas. So for me as a learner, I find it to be a tremendously helpful tool for that reason. So let's continue on from here. So welcome to this session, everybody, Active Learning Strategies Using Generative AI. Now, you might be wondering what's with this cowboy on an AI horse. And I guess what made me think about this is how I've heard people describe this whole new life we're living with AI as sort of the Wild West. It's still kind of being figured out. It feels a little bit chaotic. We're still haven't nailed down all the rules and policies in place, and every day it seems we're learning new things about what's good about it, what isn't good about it. So it got me thinking about the Wild West. And coming from this from an instructional design point of view, I wanted this session to focus on how students, as the drivers of the tools, or in this case, the horseback riders of the tools in this Wild West scenario, that they're the drivers through active learning strategies and focusing on the thought process involved in learning and how we can leverage tools like generative AI, ChatGPT, and those types of things in that process. For full disclaimer, I'm not an expert in generative AI by any means, or an evangelist. I am very much, if anything, a healthy skeptic around technology. As an instructional designer and technologist, I feel myself it's always important to be discerning when it comes to technology, since we so often feel led by it, whether it's when something isn't working the way we expect it to, or when the latest trend hits us and we feel this pressure to know the latest and greatest and how to use it, even before we've really had a chance to just think it through. So I want to frame this session around that point of reference, that of student learning outcomes as the drivers behind the strategies and assessments and the tools, which may or may not always require technology. But looking at it through that point of view, and then seeing how generative AI can play a role in a way that makes sense for your course and for your students. Oops. So we're going to be, the goal of this session essentially is to look at generative AI through an active learning lens, focusing on the journey, which is that learning and thought process, not necessarily only the destination, which would be in this case, a student assignment or a project or deliverable. So really focusing on that journey from the student going from A to Z. So just to highlight some of the objectives, first I want to define what I mean by generative AI. I have find it difficult to articulate what that means, because of its technical nature, it's so involved. So I wanted to get us all in the same place with a definition. Next, I want to provide an instructional design framework, how I was talking about how we can think about it through the lens of those outcomes, strategies from simple to complex, and then present some use cases in teaching and learning, two specific examples actually, and in addition to some additional strategies and also this wonderful resource, the Bloom's Revisited Taxonomy, which integrates generative AI as a supplemental learning tool. So it's a really great resource for kind of walking through a thought process and figuring out, well, how does this make sense in relation to maybe what I'm trying to have the students accomplish or help them accomplish. And finally, just acknowledging the concerns and limitations of generative AI. They're out there, and what things that we and the students need to be aware of. So first and foremost, my definition, or not my definition, but one that I've purposefully generated using ChatGPT. At any point or in any place in the slides where I've used, in this case, ChatGPT as my tool of choice to generate images or text, I have provided that reference on the slide. And hopefully my shared links work, but I link out to those specific prompts so you can kind of see exactly my thought process and when I was working with ChatGPT to create this definition or to create the images. And that was done on purpose. So the definition that I came up with through my conversation with ChatGPT was generative AI is an AI system designed to understand and generate various types of content, such as text, images, audio, or video. It learns from large data sets like books, websites, and media, and uses this knowledge to create new content, answer questions, compose music, or solve problems. Generative AI responds to and analyzes human prompts or input, then identifies patterns and predicts relevant information based on its training data. This data is sourced from publicly available text, images, videos, and audio, and teaches the model patterns and facts. So although it doesn't think like a human, it uses learned patterns to generate content for tasks ranging from casual conversation to creating art, music, or 3D models. So essentially, based upon those human prompts or inputs we provide ChatGPT, it can generate a response or content given the data sets and sources that it has access to through all of these different algorithms and all that stuff behind the scenes, sort of the pay no attention to the man behind the curtain type of thing, which I always think of the Wizard of Oz. So one thing I will highlight is a wonderful LibGuide through Deakin University. I'm going to click over to it so you can kind of take a look. I found this to be a really nicely made resource, not only for myself and possibly other staff and faculty, but especially students. So it really breaks it down in terms of what we're talking about when we're referring to generative AI, different types of generative AI, what those might look like, and the ethical concerns around AI, and even giving sort of suggestions on ethical ways to use it and even how to use. So this is a really nice resource that I wanted to highlight and that you'll have a link to after the session today if you'd like to take a closer look. So, starting with our teaching and learning framework, as I've been going through and getting to know and learn about AI and specifically generative AI, I've started to see I've started to categorize it in my mind, and I wanted to share that with you. Sort of a range of ways in which it kind of seems to start to make sense within the context of course development and in teaching and instruction. So first, I have been seeing it as a course development tool, seeing different ways of people using it, not only to help them articulate learning outcomes through that sort of exchange with chat GPT, maybe to refine learning outcomes, to articulate what it is they need students to do at the end of that semester or at the end of that lesson. Another really interesting use has been to help build rubrics. And not only that, but just brainstorming ideas for different ways to engage students in a class. If I may, I'm going to click over. This is a building rubric exchange. It was a prompt developed by, and I didn't cite it properly, and I will, through a course I'm taking. And it was one of the examples of how you can use something like ChatGPT to have a conversation and build an actual rubric. And then, this is not necessarily something, obviously, you would maybe want to take at face value. It's just sort of, again, that thought process on kind of starting from a stepping stone place and then refining as you go. So this was my own experience in that process. Like you can see, for example, this was the initial prompt. It generated a 3-point scale rubric. I asked it to change it to a 5-point rubric, and then I continued on asking it, add a criteria that assesses critical thinking, add a criteria that assesses the credibility and the relevance of the citations. So it just gives an example of how I actually used it to build a rubric and at least start from a place where I had something to work with. Another area is the writing process. And this is the one area I think really applies in so many different ways, is using these generative tools. And this is one of the examples that I'll show, to refine the thoughts and ideas that you might have behind a research paper. And I know you all have some of you have even just mentioned you do brainstorming with your students and you have them kind of go through that process already. Another area of use is helping to create sort of a structural outline of, of an idea, or here's my idea for a project. Can you help me sort of sketch out an outline for how to go about that? Like, just give me a starting point and I can go from there. And then summarizing the main points of a text or a piece of text. Another, as we get more into like the more maybe require more planning and more involved uses of ChatGPT or other generative AI tools, is simulating role playing. I think, Erin, you might have just mentioned this is something you've been doing with your students in your class. And that's another very specific use case I was going to highlight today. So that would be an interesting one for you to share, if you don't mind, in a little bit on how you're doing that. But sort of using it as a partner in like using ChatGPT as a person, a virtual person you're conversing with, you're role playing, you're exchanging this, playing out the scenario to go through a problem or practice the process of negotiation, for example. And finally, even on a more advanced level, is using or creating your own chatbots or prompts. And I have an example. I won't play it, but I will click over to it. I'll just stop it. I'm not going to. This is a professor from Harvard who teaches a math course, but as part of that process, he has his students actually build chatbots to teach the chatbot how to solve very complex mathematical equations. So in this process, the students are in and of themselves the teachers or the content expert behind those math concepts, and they're using these AI tools to develop a chatbot that can do these equations based on a prompt that a user would give it. And it's an iterative process. They have to go through it many, many times to make sure that it's getting it right, or getting as close to right as possible. So through that, all of that process, they're just kind of getting very, very well equipped with the concepts in the course. So that's like one of those more advanced ideas behind using generative tools in teaching and learning. So from my instructional design point of view, one of the things that helps me is to visually kind of look at different types of learning strategies and how they fall in the continuum. And I kind of saw a connection between, as I was looking at generative AI and all the different ways it could possibly be used, compared to different types of active learning strategies. This primarily is focused on active learning strategies in the classroom. So if you look over to the left-hand side, you have the more simple, and by that I mean easier to kind of do on the cuff in the classroom, like clarification pauses, have students writing a minute paper to kind of reflect on what's just been discussed or presented to them, and then moving into the more complex or more time-consuming strategies that take more time, or that might involve them to engage with one another or to really do some research or apply concepts that they're learning. And so we get into those types of activities like brainstorming and problem solving and role playing, all the way beyond to the more complex ones that require more planning and time in the classroom or even outside of the classroom. And the one place where I see the most overlap so far is in this area right here. And I found a really great way of summing it up through one of the papers that I read. And it's actually one of the sources for one of the examples. But one of the ways they suggested looking at using generative AI was to see it as sort of this tool for helping humans do better thinking. So rather than thinking of it as, sort of this content creator, thinking of it as a way, a tool to help facilitate better thinking or the thought process behind the learning. And how the questions that I've come up with is, how do we convey that to students to make them more accountable learners for themselves too? So before I go to the use cases, I thought I'd just take a pause because I do want to just sort of, maybe if anybody's willing to share your example of how you've used AI in the classroom. I think, Erin, you mentioned you've done some role playing. Could you elaborate on that or share that with us?
Sure. Can I ask a question first?
Sure.
I don't know what a jigsaw discussion is.
Well, I have, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember, because I remember it's one of these discussions where it involves multiple groups of students, and then each of those groups are given a problem or a subset of a problem they have to work together on. And then I think what happens is then that group has to break up and work with other people in the other groups, and they kind of build on each other's sort of discussion and concepts. And I have actually a more detailed description of what that is, but I think one of the thoughts or benefits of a jigsaw discussion is that it promotes a more inclusive experience, because students are able to they're not always locked into one particular group for one particular assignment or activity. They're kind of forced to interact and kind of swap out of the groups, and really, are challenged to, work with each other after they've established an initial idea with one group, go to another group of students as a representative and see how they can better integrate their ideas. So it's kind of like that. It's sort of taking these different discussions within within a class, and then having them sort of see where they can integrate what they've been talking about across all the different groups, if that
Oh, thank
makes
you.
some
I'm gonna look,
sense. Yeah.
yes, I'm gonna look into that more.
Yeah.
That's really intriguing. So role playing, I actually did this yesterday in class for the first time. So I teach in the social work program. So I taught students, first semester master students, engagement skills like open-ended question, closed questions, empathic communication. And then I had them pull out their computers, create an account on ChatGPT, and then I gave them a prompt to say, you are acting as a, and then insert some sort of client description, and then say, I will be this kind of social worker. And then ChatGPT gives you, like when I practiced it, I said, I'm a school social worker. You're a 6-year-old in school experiencing anxiety. And ChatGPT gives you what they say, but it's also like a script. So it puts in like body language in parentheses and italics, which was really cool because it gave the students, a chance to sort of see if the nonverbals and verbals aligned. And then
Interesting.
they respond to the student like they're talking to them, and ChatGPT follows it up. And I have them all do it for 5 minutes. And then I had them put in the prompt, now give me feedback on how I did. And
Hmm.
Chat GPT gives them a list of strengths and then a list of things for consideration, is what it called it. And so it gave them really cool feedback. And when I asked the students what that experience was like for them, I have 2 sections of this, so I have probably 30 students across both sections. Every single one of them loved it. They felt like it
Oh,
gave them
wow.
a chance to figure out how to ask questions without worrying if the pause was impacting the client.
Yeah.
And they felt like the feedback was actually validating for some of them, that things they didn't know were going well was, but they also felt like the things for consideration were kind of spot on and helped them see some of the areas that they still need to develop. And I was actually shocked at how accurate some of them are.
Hmm. I
It's
was going to ask
obviously,
you. Mhm.
yeah, it's not the extremes, like nobody's going to curse at you, throw things at you, threaten to kill you, which happens in social work more than it should. ChatGPT won't do that, but it does other things. And like when I was playing with it, I asked the kid a question. I gave her a choice. And then when she made a choice, I told her I couldn't do that right now. I was busy. And she reacted to it by shutting down. And then when I asked it for feedback, it said to me, you did a great job, giving choices. But when you replied this way, it can cause this feeling. And I was like, oh, shoot. Like it gave the same feedback that I would have.
Wow.
So it was really positive. And then afterwards, of course, I said to students, so now that you know how to do this, you don't need to come to class anymore, right? And they all just laughed and then talked about why they still need the human contact. And this is in addition to what we're working on, not a replacement for classroom experience.
Wow. That's really, I was going to ask you what you thought of its accuracy, because I know that's something that I've seen come up is even in um, folks that are customizing their own chatbots, is the need to kind of really test it quite a bit to make sure it's generating the right type of responses and interactions, and it's not leading the student astray. So that's great that it's been working well. And there's the one use case that I will show in a few minutes relates to um, a whole host of prompts that are now under a Creative Commons license. You can use these sort of templated prompts and customize them to your own use. And it's essentially just very structured prompts given to, in this case, ChatGPT, to create those simulated role-playing experiences. Um, and so I hope you find that of interest. And Trista, I think you mentioned that you've used it for brainstorming for essay topics.
Yeah, so actually I think I went to the same article that you went to, the economic
Ah,
article, and I got this is what it came up with. Can I share? Oh, no, I
Sure,
can't.
let me see. All right, give it a go.
Okay.
Mary Beth, you got to stop sharing first.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. So, so I actually just went into ChatGPT and said, I just kind of said, I want to create a prompt that students can use in order to simulate a conversation between an instructor or an interested party and a student, helping them with brainstorming. So I just said, suggest a prompt that would help me run this simulation of this conversation. And so it came up with a lot of, a lot of this. What you're seeing right now is probably the third iteration of that. But what's good is that, I mean, it's really long, right? And I didn't have to write all of that. It kind of helped me walk through the pieces of it. But what I like is that it tells them, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. You have a conversation with the students. After they answer this, then you say this. And then when they ask this, then you say this. And then I can just control how the conversation goes and what types of information it's pulling out of the students, And the first time I put this whole thing in just to run it and practice, it just ran everything at the same time. It didn't stop and ask me questions so then I just had to say, I want you to run that scenario interacting with me as a student. And then it did the one question at a time, waited for my response and walked me through it. But so for me, the idea was to have something that I can give to the students to say, here, if you're completely stuck, run this. Use ChatGPT as a conversation partner, and it will bring out the same things that I would bring out if I were brainstorming with you.
That's great.
That sounds awesome.
That's really great.
Yeah.
What I noticed in my own, experimenting is that I could either create my own prompt through a subscribed version of ChatGPT where I could upload my own content. Or it still worked if I didn't have a license. I could just copy and paste that entire structured prompt with all of the details on what I wanted it to do. And it would, even if I, in the student role, in theory, copied and pasted in there, it would then walk me through what the role playing experience I was looking to, simulate. So at first I thought it was just only through a more, a paid version, but it's something you can do even outside of that. So it's definitely some interesting ways to implement it. So I guess kind of expanding on that, we're really sort of all on the same page and in sync on where we're seeing use in this, because the two use cases I was going to show you kind of relate to exactly that. So the first one that I wanted to really just kind of address was sort of just written assignments, how it can be leveraged for writing assignments, whatever it may be. And really, I've been seeing how a lot of writing centers in higher ed have adopted ChatGPT as a tool to help students through that writing process. One in particular, Saginaw University has some really great prompts that the tutors are given, or guides the writing tutors are given to work with the students. So they're sitting still side by side with students, but they're kind of coaching them on how to use the ChatGPT to help them either generate a list of topics for a research paper, how to expand on a topic, or even how to create an outline. So, and then this is an example of sort of different types of prompts they might have the student use based on their particular assignment. And anything in brackets would be the customizable specific information for that particular student. And so seeing it as this kind of tool for, as a stepping stone, like you were saying, Trista, with how you've had students use it for brainstorming, is using it as the stepping stone for generating topics or ideas, but then moving on then to the more in-depth research part using peer-reviewed credible academic resources. So it could, you know, have them start in this very basic way of generating ideas, but with the ultimate destination being they're still going to have to, you know, be expected to use these more discipline specific databases and resources to do research. Moving on to that role-playing simulation idea, and this is, I think, the same thing you were mentioning you saw as well. This was the various prompts that these two professors through the Wharton School of the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania have shared through a Creative Commons license. And just to give you an example of one, this is kind of how they structure like them. This is sort of an idea of basically you could use this as a template to create an actual role-playing simulation. And this is just one example. So what for me, I had done a training on a train the trainer session on managing difficult behavior in a training session. And so I had this sort of content. It was a role-playing type of lesson. So I used that content and swapped out their content using this structure. And so in my particular case, you know, it was a really interesting process to go through. If I click over, I can show you that prompt. So using sort of that same structure, I developed this role-playing simulation called Managing Difficult Behavior. And in this case, I created the prompt through my licensed version of ChatGPT. So I signed up for a very basic license. I went to create an actual prompt, as you see here. And what I needed to do to build that was basically give them all that instruction, give them an idea of what types of conversation starters I'd want the students to have access to, or myself in this case, and then I could upload various types of resources they would also use in that interaction. And it was very, very effective in going through a scenario where I'm teaching a class and I just have this one type of person who is just giving me the hardest time, and I have to kind of figure out, well, how do I communicate with this person in a way where it's going to diffuse whatever negative possible thing could happen. And so I was able to give or inform ChatGPT, okay, you know, what types of questions or ways that I wanted them to continually ask, you know, guide the student or ask them. And, you know, I will share this as well, so you can kind of see that. But on the other hand, what I was mentioning is, even if I didn't have this licensed version, I did a test where I just copied this right into ChatGPT, like a basic account, and it still walked me through all of that whole process. So it's definitely got that power to you know, really provide these different ways that students can simulate different experiences. And so not just with like sort of they had some other different simulations related to putting the student in the role of teacher, critiquing a scenario. So as you can see, there's different types of categories they have and different types of prompts that they've developed and have provided in this resource. So it's definitely worth taking a look if this is something that you think would work well in your class. oops, one, let me look at it. So I wanted to just expand on a couple of other thoughts that I have been thinking about and learning about. You know, this Bloom's taxonomy revisited is a really worthwhile resource to take a look at. Again, it's sort of one of these things that kind of helps you think about, well, there's generative AI, how do I use that? But how do I still, you know, maintain this idea that learning is as a very social experience. And so breaking it down and kind of giving a sense of how you can kind of take a look at it in that way. So it, you know, it has your hierarchy of different types of thinking skills, higher order to lower order, outlining the more distinctive human skills that obviously we want to make sure students are experiencing, or the trainees experiencing, but then how the Gen AI can be in terms of supplementing that learning. So really kind of breaking it down, and I thought this was a great resource to bring today. But just some other thoughts on strategies was, you know, I've been seeing how, you know, one possible motivator to cheating, which is a concern, obviously, is that time management element, that stress of missing a deadline, and just kind of temptation kicks in, or it's just, you know, I feel like my back is against the wall, so I'm just going to just have this thing create what the paper that I need to submit and just assign, you know, submit it for a grade. And you know, just within the lesson development process is, you know, how are there ways to scaffold an assignment and use those milestones, use generative AI, or, you know, during those, in those milestones, to help them build off of each level or phase of that project. The other thing is, you know, having students substantiate claims generated with AI as part of an assignment. So really just leaning in and saying, you know, you definitely can use this tool. You know, I encourage it, but my condition is that you substantiate the claims, and you provide that along with your submission. Have students analyze and evaluate content for possible bias, whether this is a prevalent topic or issue that's discussed in a class in terms of bias and that type of thing, but how can they actually kind of use AI as the case study for it? You know, how is generative AI being biased, and having them kind of look at this from an analytical point of view. And then finally, just establishing your own ground rules for use. You know, what's okay and what's not okay. You know, how is your discipline currently using it? Is there any specific applications or uses that are prevalent that they might see when they go out into the profession that they could now start using or utilizing? And just establishing those types of ground rules for your class. So where I'm going to end off, and then I hope we have a few more minutes if you guys want to exchange thoughts or ideas, is, you know, naturally those concerns and limitations of generative AI. You know, number one, information may be false. It's generating ideas and information and content only as good as the sources it's pulling it from. So we know that not everything on the internet is true. So naturally, or in these various resources, so naturally the chances of it coming back with false information is going to happen. And, you know, our students are aware of that. How do we communicate that to them as well? Citations and quotes may be invented. I think inherently, generative AI wants to please you or please us. So it's trying to give you the best possible answer. And so in that way, it might come up with just information that's not even there. I think one other possible reason I had been reading about was that because it is pulling from all of these different sources, if it's been asked to provide a citation and it's already synthesized this new thing from several different places, it might hallucinate and generate just this made up citation. So there's that issue as well. Obviously, responses may contain biases, just as in all the resources and information we have out there already. There is that distortion of ideas and biases that are predominantly already out there. And then a big one being violating academic integrity and intellectual property. You know, is it tempting to just, you know, let it do all the work for me, you know, and see if I can just coast through? What's the motivation behind that? But just, you know, the possibility of that happening. But then also, is the data or the information out there, are the original authors even aware that it's being used? You know, what are the permissions or awareness of those original authors, those original publishers? Do they know that their information is being pulled? So that kind of concern around, that's not always the case. And then another one that I've kind of been, I guess, more recently become aware of, which I didn't even think about, was the environmental impact issues. You know, all of this energy it takes to power these processors and you know, physical places that are supporting all of this processing. So I want to stop there. We're almost at our 45-minute mark, but I want to just end it with final thoughts, questions, ideas, anything at all.
I have another question.
Sure.
So if I wanted to create my own chatbot and input information to better refine my role plays, is it unethical and inappropriate for me to upload a PDF of my textbook if all the students have already bought the textbook and we're only using it for that class?
That's a really great question. I don't have an answer, but I would love to research, you know, look into it for you, because that's a really, really good question. I know that if you do, at least in this case, and I'm sure it's with other tools, there are different limitations you can put on to what that model can share out after you create it. So you can, you know, I don't know if it's 100%, but even OpenAI has fairly, you know, so far some really good resources on how that all works. Like, what happens to all of this? What happens to my content if I create my own prompt? You know, so I think that's definitely something I couldn't answer, but would definitely be interested in exploring that as well. You know, it's a good question.
I have a question that you're probably not going to know the answer to, but I'm just throwing it out there.
That's all right.
What are the chances that Nazareth would buy a license for all of the faculty members to get the upgraded ChatGPT?
Oh goodness, that's a really
Yeah.
good question. I don't know. And actually I don't know if my director Susan was here. I think she had to leave a little bit early, but that's something that I'll ask her about. I don't know, above and beyond the TLT realm, have there been conversations around that type of thing? I think it's all still kind of being figured out, but definitely one that I'll inquire about, see if I can get an answer for you in terms of even if it's, oh yeah, you know, it looks like we're, you know, is there, you know, a committee or a task force or these things happening behind the scenes that will begin to start looking at those types of requests or questions. So definitely good input, good thing for me to follow up on. So thank you. Well, we just about have 1 minute left. I just wanted to leave you with this quote because I thought it was really insightful, and it's, AI will change education, but how we will shape that change to create a more effective, equitable, and engaging learning environment for all. So just kind of looking at it in a positive light, in a hopeful light. So I thank you for coming, and I will send out the recording for this session, as well as the resources that I have linked to. Okay, so
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Have a good afternoon.